"You're useless," he said. But he had no idea who I was. I was wrapping up a late quarterly report at our Seattle office, the glow of my monitor casting long shadows across the room. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, rhythmic and soft, a familiar soundtrack in this city. Then came a different sound, sharper, harder. Shoes clacking across the marble hallway. Fast, loud, purposeful. The door burst open. No knock, no introduction. "Linda," he said flatly. I looked up. Standing in the doorway was Grant Ellison, the new CEO. He'd only been in the role for 6 weeks, but acted like he'd built the company from scratch. Tall, crisp navy suit, cufflinks gleaming like trophies. The kind of smug confidence you can only buy with a degree and a LinkedIn following. "We need a word." He threw a folder onto my desk. It landed with a soft thud, sliding just far enough to seem intentional. I didn't flinch. I folded my hands in front of me. "Of course," I said, calmly motioning to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned forward, both hands braced on my desk like a high school debate champion about to deliver his knockout line. "We're restructuring senior leadership. Effective immediately, your position has been terminated." I blinked once. "I see. May I ask why?" His lips curled into a half smile. "You contribute nothing, Linda. Nothing meaningful. You're outdated. This is a high-velocity company. We need innovators, not placeholders clinging to dusty titles and ancient processes." There it was, delivered cold and deliberate. He wanted the moment to sting. But what he didn't know, what made my silence feel like thunder, was that I had been preparing for this. I nodded slowly, holding his gaze. "Thank you for your clarity." I said, my tone even. Grant blinked just once. He hadn't expected that. No protest, no anger, no begging. "I've asked HR to send your severance paperwork by email. I'll need your badge and company-issued devices returned by 5. He straightened his tie like he just checkmated me. I stood, extended my hand. "All the best, Grant." He hesitated, then grasped it firm, dominating. The kind of handshake meant to seal a win. He had no idea that I was still holding the real cards. As he walked out, I sat back down. Rain still tapped on the windows. The Seattle skyline glimmered in reflection. And I allowed myself the faintest smile, because Grant had just fired the woman who owned 82% of the company's voting shares, a detail he'd overlooked. And I was just getting started. Continuation of Linda Hayworth's story. Seattle, Washington, November 2023, because what Grant didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I wasn't just a department head. 2 weeks earlier, everything had changed, and I'd been waiting. Quietly. I glanced at the framed photograph on the corner of my desk. My grandfather, standing proudly in front of the original Hayworth Industries warehouse back in 1952. One arm around my father, who looked about 12 at the time. Both men had built the company from the ground up, floor by floor, bolt by bolt. Grant thought he could push me out like I was some irrelevant middle manager clinging to the past. He had no idea the foundation beneath his feet still bore my family's name, hidden, yes. Forgotten, never. I reached out and ran my finger slowly across the silver edge of the frame. Wait until the time is right. That's what my father always said when it came to legacy and to power. I stood, calm, steady, and began packing. Not much. A ceramic mug my team gave me last Christmas with Data Whisperer etched in gold. 2 photos of my kids, and a leather-bound notebook worn soft from years of ideas, sketches, and plans Grant would never see. Outside my office door, I felt the shift. Tension in the air, curiosity disguised as indifference. A few people glanced up as I passed. Some offered awkward half-smiles. Others looked away. I could read it all in their eyes. What happened? Why her? She's been here forever. I gave a polite nod as I walked, my heels echoing against the polished floor. No outburst, no performance. As I stepped out into the Seattle afternoon, cool wind brushing against my coat, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: freedom. They thought they'd ended my story, but all they'd done was hand me the pen. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Typed a single message to my attorney. It's time. The reply came seconds later. Understood. Board notification in motion. Special shareholder meeting scheduled. 5 business days. I turned and looked back at the gleaming building floor to ceiling. Glass-etched steel, the Hayworth Industries logo mounted high like a crown. Grant thought it was over, but the next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee. It would be as the majority shareholder. 5 days earlier, I sat across from Thomas Beck, my father's lifelong attorney, in his downtown office. Everything in that room whispered legacy: mahogany bookshelves, hand-woven rugs, the faint scent of ink and aged paper. Between us sat a thick envelope sealed in crimson wax. My father's seal. Your father left specific instructions, Thomas said softly. This envelope was to be opened only on your 58th birthday. The grandfather clock behind him clicked once noon. Thomas gave a small nod. It's time. And I broke the seal. I broke the crimson seal and unfolded the letter inside a thick, cream-colored sheet embossed with my father's initials. The handwriting was firm, deliberate, unmistakably his. Linda. If you're reading this, it means you've reached the age where you've proven yourself not to the world, but to yourself. I never doubted you would. By now, you've worked harder than most ever will. You've been passed over, talked down to underestimated, and through it all, you've remained true to your character. This company was my legacy, and when I stepped away, I retained 82% of the voting shares. Quietly, privately, because I wasn't ready to hand them to anyone until I knew they were ready to carry what comes with them. They're yours now, with full authority, effective immediately. I read the paragraph 3 times before I could even blink. 82%, not a courtesy stake, not ceremonial, a controlling interest. It wasn't shock or greed that took my breath. It was gravity. The realization that I now held the authority to shift everything. I turned to Thomas Beck, still seated across from me. This is real, I asked, holding the documents like they might dissolve in my hands. He nodded. Absolutely airtight. Your father made sure no one could contest it. All filings were kept silent. Not even the board has been notified. I sat back, the edges of my world sharpening. All those years being told I was too cautious, too technical, not leadership material. Watching fresh out of MBA men with half my skill and none of my loyalty get paraded into executive roles while I kept the engine running behind the scenes. I thought time would earn me respect. Turns out it only earned me scars. What I really needed was leverage. And now I had it. If you believe this was just the beginning, hit subscribe, because the next chapter doesn't just rebuild a company. It rebuilds everything they tried to break. I want to move slowly, I said at last, carefully folding the documents and sliding them back into the envelope. No press, no internal buzz yet. Thomas nodded. We'll prepare everything. When you're ready, we can notify the board in under 48 hours. Good. I stood, gathering the envelope into my leather satchel. Because I want them blindsided, especially Grant. Thomas raised a brow, amused. You've got your father's instincts. I gave a wry smile. I've got my own. As I stepped out into the early evening light of downtown Seattle, the skyline shimmered through fresh rain. For the first time in years, the city didn't feel cold or corporate. It felt alive, like it was waiting on me. And for the first time, I didn't just work in this city. I was about to own it. The towering glass buildings that once loomed over me now looked smaller, almost delicate. Seattle's steel skyline had always felt imposing when I was just another name on the payroll, but not anymore. Because now I wasn't just an employee. I was the owner of 82% of Hayworth Industries, the same company Grant Ellison thought he controlled. The board didn't know. Grant didn't know. But they would. Soon. Back in the present, on the afternoon Grant fired me, I walked out with grace. I dropped off my badge and company phone at HR with a composed thank you, and even shook hands with the receptionist on my way out. No one blinked. No one suspected a thing. As I strolled through the lobby, Grant's words echoed in my mind. You're outdated, useless, almost laughable now. The man who dismissed me so easily had just fired the person who owned the majority of his fate. And the most poetic part, he'd done it all himself. By Monday, he was already acting like he wore a crown. 3 colleagues reached out. 2 sent texts. Grant's walking around like he owns the place, literally. HR's being weirdly quiet. You okay? One even called voice low and worried he's saying you couldn't handle the pressure. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence was part of the strategy. Let Grant get comfortable. Let him gloat. I needed him confident, assured smug. Because the higher he climbed, the harder he'd fall. That afternoon, I sat in the farthest booth of a tucked-away cafe in Capitol Hill. The place smelled like dark roast and lemon pastry. Jazz trickled from ceiling speakers, mellow and rich. Across from me sat Thomas Beck, my father's longtime attorney. His gray suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable, exactly the way I needed it. It's done, he said, sliding a thick leather folder across the table. Notices went out this morning. The special shareholder meeting is scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. I opened the folder. Inside were the official documents, crisp, clean, brutal in their simplicity. Notice of special shareholder meeting agenda review, an appointment of executive leadership. At the bottom, in bold ink, Linda Hayworth, I traced my signature with my finger. A freight train. That's what this was. And it was barreling straight for Grant. They'll have 2 business days to realize the ground just shifted beneath them, Thomas said. I took a sip of my coffee. Slow, calm. Good, I murmured. Because when I returned, it wouldn't be to plead. It would be to reclaim what was already mine. You're sure about this? Thomas Beck asked, his voice low and deliberate. I met his gaze without flinching. They pulled the pin the moment they fired me, I said. I'm just handing them the grenade. He gave a slow nod, something between a lawyer's approval and a friend's quiet respect. Your father would be proud. But this wasn't about pride. Not really. I'm doing it because this company deserves better, I said. Because I deserve better. And because Grant needs to learn what real leadership actually looks like. The next morning, Tuesday, I met with Caroline Evans, the trustee who had managed the shares since my father's passing. Caroline wasn't just a steward of the estate. She had worked alongside my grandfather in the earliest days when Hayworth Industries was still assembling modular parts in a rented warehouse on Rainier Avenue. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a steel-eyed smile. I've watched Grant Ellison dismantle your father's legacy brick by brick, she said, no pretense in her voice. She slid a heavy file across her desk toward me. You don't owe him politeness. Inside the file was everything I needed, and more than I expected. Ownership certificates, voting records, internal performance audits. And the numbers, they were damning. Employee satisfaction had plunged 35%. Mid-year turnover was the worst since 2008. Executive perks had ballooned by 300%, while frontline development teams were working with outdated equipment. Revenue growth flat during a tech boom. He's been propping up the reports with inflated projections. Caroline said, voice slicing through my thoughts. If this keeps up, he'll hollow out the company within 2 years. I nodded, taking it all in. Every metric, every misstep. Grant had practically written his own exit memo. We'll let the numbers speak, I said. Caroline gave me a look. 1 part approval, 1 part challenge. It's your company now, she said. What you do next, it defines everything that follows. I know, I said softly. And I won't waste it. As I stepped out of her office, I passed the mural in the lobby. A warm oil painting, my father standing proudly in front of our original building, his hand resting gently on the shoulder of a young girl in a red dress. Me. I stood there for a long time just breathing. He had believed in legacy, not as a monument, but as a living responsibility. Even though he was gone, I could feel his presence, like a hand on my back, urging me forward. By Wednesday morning, the office chatter had turned electric. Did you hear about the shareholder meeting? Grant's been on edge all day? Who called it? They'd find out soon enough. But not yet. I wanted Grant walking into that boardroom thinking it was just another quarterly review, thinking he still owned the room. Let him strut. Let him grin. Because when the truth landed, it would crack like thunder. And this time, I wouldn't be the one walking out. Thursday morning arrived with a crisp bite in the air, the kind of cold that cuts through your coat and makes the whole world feel sharper. The kind of morning that belongs to turning points. I dressed deliberately. A black wool suit with clean tailoring, soft gray lining, and a silk blouse that whispered authority. No flashy jewelry, no unnecessary statement pieces. Just poise. It was the kind of outfit you don't wear to impress. You wear it because you're already in control. By 8:50 a.m., I stood outside the building I had called home for over a decade. The same building where I'd been dismissed like a forgotten file in a forgotten drawer. Only now, I wasn't just Linda Hayworth department lead. I was the majority shareholder of Hayworth Industries. I stepped into the lobby. Heads turned. The receptionist, Emily, who had handed me my visitor badge on my very first day 12 years ago, froze mid-sentence. I watched her recognition bloom, then confusion, then silence. She didn't try to stop me. Upstairs, behind the frosted glass of the executive boardroom, I could hear voices, Grant Ellison's voice above all. Confident, animated, like a man standing at the top of a podium built out of other people's work. I didn't slow down. At the elevator, Thomas Beck was waiting. He handed me the slim leather folder without a word. His face was unreadable, but behind his eyes was something close to anticipation. "They're all inside," he said softly. Grant's already halfway through his strategy pitch. I nodded once. Not for long. We walked the final stretch together. My heels echoed down the corridor like a countdown. When I reached the door, I paused. One slow breath. Then I opened it. The boardroom fell into silence like someone had flipped a switch. 10 members seated at a long oak table turned toward me. Grant stood at the far end, mid-sentence, a slide glowing behind him. Q4 Strategy and Vision, presented by Grant Ellison, CEO. His eyebrows shot up. "Linda," he said, his voice tight, "this meeting is for board members only. You're no longer." I walked forward, calmly pulled out a chair at the head of the table and placed the leather folder in front of me. "Exactly," I said, voice steady. "Which is why I'm taking my seat." And I did. The shift in energy was instant. Board members turned toward me. Some leaned forward. Mr. Callahan, still sharp at 70, adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents I began to lay out in front of him. Grant blinked. Hard. "Excuse me." I slid copies of the ownership certificates and trust documentation across the polished table, letting the weight of each page speak louder than my voice. And then I said it, "I'm here as the majority shareholder with 82% voting rights, effective immediately." "I'm here," I said evenly, my voice clear but calm, "as the majority shareholder of this company, holding 82% of the voting shares effective as of my 58th birthday. In accordance with the trust left by my father." The words settled into the boardroom like a dropped pin in an empty cathedral. There was a long pause before Mr. Callahan, our oldest board member, sharp as ever, picked up the trust document and scanned it with squinted eyes. His fingers moved across the heavy paper slowly. "Is this accurate?" he asked, his voice soft but pointed. "It is," Thomas Beck answered before I could. He stepped forward, placing another copy in front of the board secretary. "The trust is fully executed. Ownership filings have already been processed with the state and the IRS. Linda Hayworth," he paused and looked at me with quiet pride, "is now by every legal and fiduciary standard the controlling owner of Hayworth Industries." Grant Ellison gave a short, humorless laugh from across the table. "This is nonsense," he barked. "You expect us to just accept this stunt?" "Believe it," I said coolly, "or read the documents yourself." His face twitched just slightly, but the smugness he wore like armor began to slip. The disbelief was still there, but it cracked, and beneath it was something unmistakable fear. I leaned forward, steady, calm, unshaken. "You fired me, Grant," I said. "Told me I added nothing. Called me obsolete. And you did it without realizing you were dismissing the one person in this building with the power to remove you permanently. Murmurs rippled across the table. A few of the members exchanged looks. One leaned into the other and whispered under his breath, "I've called this special shareholder meeting. I continued to formally review and assess executive leadership." Effective immediately? Grant's hands curled into fists. "This is a coup," he hissed. "A vendetta?" I shook my head slowly. "No, this is accountability." I slid a second folder across the table, thicker, heavier. The performance audits compiled by Caroline Evans, declining profit margins, soaring turnover, inflated executive perks, flat revenue in a rising market. I didn't need to elaborate. The numbers roared louder than any speech. One board member flipped a page and gave a low whistle. Another whispered to the CFO, who paled as he pulled up internal dashboards on his phone. "You can't do this," Grant growled. "I already have," I said quietly. The board secretary looked stunned. You don't need a vote." "I hold 82%, I said. "I am the vote." Mr. Callahan leaned back in his chair, lips pressed together in thought. Then, with slow finality, he nodded. "In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands. Effective immediately." Grant slammed his palm on the table. "You'll regret this." I met his glare without blinking. "No," I said, voice like stone. "I won't." Security didn't need to be called. Grant Ellison walked out on his own. But as he did, I watched him, shoulders, stiff pace, slower than usual, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked small. By Monday morning, his nameplate was gone from the CEO's office door. No announcement, no press release, just absence. I didn't take over his office right away. I wasn't interested in playing the role of the triumphant replacement parading around with a new title on the door. There was something more urgent: rebuilding the company my father had poured his life into. The one Grant had nearly hollowed out in less than 2 years. That same morning, I called an all-hands meeting in the main conference hall. The same room where Grant used to give inflated speeches full of buzzwords and half-truths. I walked in alone. No escort, no announcement, no slideshow. The room was packed, but the front row was noticeably empty. No one wanted to look over-eager. I scanned the faces: engineers, assistants, managers, custodians. They were watching me, but not with admiration. Not yet. Caution, curiosity, skepticism. Some arms were crossed, some heads tilted, some eyes narrowed just enough to say, "We've seen this before. Leaders come and go. We don't trust promises anymore." I took a breath and stepped up to the front. No podium, just a voice. "Some of you know me," I began, letting my eyes sweep the room. "Some of you only know the version of me that Grant painted." A few glances exchanged. Someone at the back shifted in their chair. "But let me start here. I'm not here to take power. I'm here to restore trust." It wasn't a roar of applause, but something shifted. Slight, subtle. People leaned in. Shoulders relaxed. Pens stopped tapping. "For years, this company ran on your ideas," I said. "Your late nights. Your belief that what we were building actually mattered." I paused. Let it land. And somewhere along the way, that got lost. The silence that followed was different. Not cold, reflective. "I was fired last week," I added, allowing a faint smile. "Told I wasn't the kind of leader Hayworth needed, that I lacked vision, that I wasn't bold enough, that I didn't belong." A few people chuckled, soft, surprised. I didn't fight back. Not then. Because I knew something Grant didn't. I let the silence stretch. Leadership. I said, my voice steady, isn't about volume or vanity. It's about vision and accountability. And now they were listening. Leadership, I continued, isn't about barking orders or building empires. It's about lifting the people who actually do the work, about seeing and respecting those who make this company what it is. As I looked out across the room, I met eyes with people I knew, engineers I'd stayed late with debugging code at midnight, assistants who had been doing the jobs of 2 people without a title bump, and team leads who'd held entire departments together with nothing but sheer will and unpaid overtime. Starting today, I said, that changes. And it did. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something no one expected from the new boss. I listened. I met with department heads, interns, QA testers, janitors, operations leads. I sat in break rooms and engineering pits, not conference rooms. I asked simple questions. What's not working? What do you need? Who around you deserves better? And then I acted. I promoted Mia Lopez, a soft-spoken customer service rep who had been quietly running her entire department while her manager golfed on Fridays. Mia became head of client experience. I called back Andre Washington, a gifted product manager who had resigned 6 months earlier after being passed over 3 times in favor of less capable hires. He returned as director of product strategy and brought half his old team back with him. I took a scalpel to HR. Every complaint, grievance, and ignored report that had been gathering dust, I read them, investigated them, acted on them. Within the first week, 3 toxic mid-level managers were let go, each one notorious, each one protected under Grant's Old Boys Club. Then I launched something my father had once dreamed of, but never managed to push through the Board the People First initiative. It was built on one core truth: talent doesn't wear a title. The initiative rewarded collaboration, transparency, and innovation, not favoritism or boardroom bravado. It gave every employee, from receptionist to lead architect, a clear path to growth and recognition. No more whisper networks, no more ceilings you couldn't see but could always feel. No more gatekeepers with secret keys. Just good people doing great work and finally getting the credit they deserved. Late one night, I walked the halls alone. The fluorescent silence that once haunted the building had changed. I heard laughter from the break room, music from a speaker, soft conversation drifting down the corridor. Desks were alive again with plants, photos, comic strips, dog calendars. The space felt human, warm, free. Near the engineering bullpen, I paused. Scrawled on the whiteboard in thick blue marker were 3 words: she came back. Underlined twice. Not she took over, not she replaced Grant. Just, she came back. And that meant everything. A month later, I finally stepped into the CEO's office. I didn't change much. I didn't have to. The real change had already begun. I kept the original walnut desk. The wood was slightly worn at the corner's edges, smoothed by time, not damage. It had been my father's desk, and his before that. The broad windows behind it still overlooked downtown Seattle, with Mount Rainier rising in the distance like a quiet sentinel. But I did add one thing: a large framed photo on the wall behind me. It was from the company's opening day, my father and me, both of us smiling in front of the very first Hayworth Industries sign. I must have been 11, clinging to his arm, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big. We were hopeful. We had no idea how hard it would be, or how worth it. I didn't hang the photo as a trophy. I hung it as a reminder. This wasn't just a company. It was a responsibility. At the first board meeting following Grant Ellison's removal, I stood at the head of the same long table where I'd once been dismissed. The energy was different now. Half of the board seats were filled by women. Several members were under 40. The room wasn't filled with egos. It was filled with people who had ideas and the courage to share them. As the room quieted, I took a breath. Before we begin, I said, scanning the faces in front of me, I want to thank you. A few eyebrows lifted. Not for welcoming me back, not for voting with me, but for believing in change, for making hard decisions when the easy ones would have been safer, for helping rebuild something better than what we had before. I paused and let the moment settle. Someone once told me I lacked leadership, I added with a smile. Soft laughter bubbled in a few corners. But leadership, I said, steady now, isn't about titles. It's about vision, about accountability, about the courage to do what's right, especially when it's not easy. A ripple of applause followed. Not loud, not performative, but real. After the meeting, I didn't go straight back to my office. I walked the halls floor by floor, shaking hands, sharing smiles, asking questions, listening. Departments that once felt silent and strained were alive again. People weren't just showing up. They were showing up with purpose. And as I passed one of the older marketing suites, I caught a line of whiteboard notes that read, "Leadership doesn't shout, it builds." I didn't write that, but it felt like it was written for me. This wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about belonging. And finally, after all these years, we belonged. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you were too quiet to lead, then you know a piece of my story. I didn't win by yelling. I won by listening, learning, and acting with purpose. If you believe in building something better, leave me a comment below. Share what you would have done, or just say you're with me. Because no one leads alone, and I'd love to know who's standing in my corner right now.